Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Art History. First and foremost, the disclaimer of all disclaimers, I am not an art history professor. I am not a researcher. I am not a historian. This is purely me liking art history, doing my research, and spewing it out for my brainless dodo bird YouTube audience. Love you guys. Again, if you're attempting to use what I'm about to say in this video for like a research paper, probably don't. This is kind of more for enjoyment, and it's to spark inspiration too if you guys find this stuff as interesting as I do. So without further ado, recap. Episode 1, we talked about Klimt's Beethoven Frieze. Episode 2, we talked about Andy Warhol's soup cans. If you haven't seen those, go watch them. It's a fun time. It's a really fun time. Also, this video is not sponsored by Chex Mix, but Chex Mix, hey! If you'd like to sponsor me, go ahead. I spilled my Chex Mix on the floor. Feels like we're just sleepover, guys. We're having Bible study. Sorry, I need a snack break. So, this episode is going to be about Surrealism, specifically the beginning of Surrealism, and Dada, which was another art movement that kind of was the predecessor to Surrealism. And the whole idea behind Dadaism and Surrealism is this was a reaction to the absurdity of World War I. So we're pinpointing this around 1915 as the start of the movement. Just senseless violence, senseless killing, senseless acts by governments that were made to protect us. This absurd society thus influenced absurd art. So it was a reaction and a mockery of World War I. There are a bunch of notable contributors to Dada, one of them being Duchamp, but the ones I more want to focus on are famous surrealist artists, which we've all seen, Salvador Dali, Rene Magritte, Max Ernst, even Frida Kahlo is considered a surrealist to a certain extent. The Dada founders saw themselves as non-artists creating non-art in a society where art was meaningless. It was this sort of nihilistic, life doesn't mean anything. Y'all are treating us like toy soldiers. Human life is expendable at this point, that sort of thing. So moving from Dada into Surrealism, which is gonna be kind of the meat of this video. Surrealism at its fundamental level questions the status quo of the world, and it challenges the notions of reality. What do we accept as our reality? And there's this heavy emphasis on the fertility of the subconscious mind. So a lot of what Surrealism is attempting to tap in to the subconscious. And this is so obviously based on Sigmund Freud's groundbreaking theories about the human unconscious, the human subconscious, and our dreams, and how that all interacts and plays into who we are as people, our deepest wants and desires. Freud published this around, I think it was turn of the century, 1899, 1900. And what's tea is Freud actually wanted nothing to do with the surrealists for the most part. Freud saw dreams as a tool for psychoanalysis and the eventual healing of the mind and of trauma. And if this is appearing in your dreams, it means X thing. Whereas surrealist artists saw dreams as purely, artistic imagery to then translate and put into their works. And it's funny because Freud's research and theories were intended to benefit and be used by the medical community. But calling back to the first video I ever did in this series, disciplines rarely ever exist in a vacuum. Human nature demands that art infiltrate every school of thought, and thus we have Surrealism. The beauty of Surrealism and how vague it is as a movement is that these artists were free from the restraints of reason, aesthetics, morality. A lot of dark shit appears in surrealist work. So before we get into the actual artists that I want to talk about, it's important to note that this wasn't the beginning of humans having abstract thought and humans creating art that was disturbing and out there. This goes back all the way to, one of the most notable is in the 1500s, Hieronymus Bosch. Bitch, if you have never seen Hieronymus Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, it is a trip and a half, girl, I'll tell you what, it is a trip and a half. To think that during the Renaissance, concurrently, give or take 50, 100 years, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Raphael, they're all creating these groundbreaking sculptures, frescoes, murals, oil paintings. It's just this is the peak of human artistic creation at this time. And then at the same time, you're seeing Hieronymus Bosch creating just these what for like paintings. It is incredible. Another great example is forgive me if I mispronounce, I believe it's Giuseppe Arcimboldo. This is around the same, give or take a few 100 years, around like 1573. A notable work by him is Winter. It is fantastic. To think 1573, are you hearing me, dude? The 1500s, they were creating this sort of art. So by no means was Salvador Dali the genesis of the Surrealist movement. That's to imply that would be a huge mistake. I also want to note, historically, what was happening at the time, because art doesn't exist just as art. It's always intertwined with history. So we're talking about World War I to begin, which was a global conflict, a 20th century war being fought with 19th century tactics that just left society tattered and broken. I mean, a whole generation of young soldiers dead. For what? Like, for what reason? Next is the ideological war between communism, fascism, liberal and democratic capitalism. Shortly after that, we're moving into the 40s, more wartime, more avoidable atrocities. Next, changes in scientific theory. We've got Einstein's theory of relativity at this time. We've got the further development of quantum physics. We've got the introduction of nuclear energy in 1919, and then the eventual first nuclear bomb in 1945. Next, we've got all the developments in the medical psychological field, Freud's interpretation of dreams. We've got Pavlov's conditioned dog experiment. Next, think about technology, flight, cars, radio, television. All of this happened around this time, the beginning of the 20th century. All of these changes to Western thought and rhetoric are happening at the same time. So it's understandable how this movement happened when it did and who were the leaders of this movement. One of the things I find most frustrating about Surrealism. Surrealism is probably one of my favorite art movements, other than like Impressionism or Hyperrealism, is that when I'm looking at a Surrealist painting, when I'm looking at a Salvador Dali painting, I am looking for meaning. Surely there's like a commentary on society or religion, or like maybe this is tea about his relationships or something like that. And in doing that, I'm kind of negating the entire idea of Surrealism. They used dreams and the absurdity of dreams as inspiration for their work. There is no meaning to be interpreted. It's art, just because that's what they wanted to paint in the moment. But it makes you think, like, surely there's a deeper meaning, because these artists are drawing from their subconscious. They're pulling this up out of the deepest recesses of their mind. Surely it means something. Sometimes it does. Sometimes the artist would explain, and this is that and the other, and we can infer that blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And we'll get into Salvador Dali's persistence of memory in a second. But it's very frustrating because for the most part, no, there are not explanations to accompany these works. And while some works may be a social commentary to a certain extent, like Pablo Picasso's Guernica, commentary on the German bombing of the Spanish town Guernica, and just the suffering and pain that events like that cause. I mean, after the bombing is done and you're moving on with world events, that city that is now decimated. That's what Picasso tried to capture in his works. When I was in Madrid, bitch, I saw Guernica with my own eyes, and I literally stood there and we were in that room for a good 30, 40 minutes, just looking at it. It's massive. It's literally the size of an entire wall. Groundbreaking piece of art. And if you haven't researched it, it's really interesting, if you want to just Google it. But even though there's, those little one-off works like that, where it's like, obviously there's a deeper meaning, it's clear that fundamentally there's nothing to be taught or learned from Surrealism, in my opinion. At least from the artist's point of view. Because a lot of it was just, I put it on the canvas. Surrealism was simply a display of surreal images. The rest of it is up to the imagination of the viewer. But I'll leave that conversation for you guys in the comments. If you want to talk about it, I'll respond. Surrealists around the 30s, or around this time, were also very experimental with cinema. When you think about the technology of the time, the things that they were able to accomplish and the artistic imagery they were able to show, the images they were able to do with the limited special effects at the time is truly wow. In college, I took a course called Spanish film. Shout out Dr. Curry. Dr. Curry at Texas A&M, if you watch my videos, I love you. You changed my life. One of the most famous surrealist pieces of cinema is Un Chien Andalou, an Andalusian dog, by Luis Buñuel, and Dalí also helped create it. It's plotless. It has no meaning. It has no plot. It was just surreal imagery for the sake of surreal imagery. All of that being said, let's focus on the masterpieces, masterpieces of surrealism. Persistence of memory, Salvador Dali. You've seen it, you know it, you love it, it's everywhere. Possibly one of the most famous surrealist works of all time. The central theme of the work is time, what we can interpret, and part of it is what Dali has said about the work himself. So let's break it down on a fundamental level, the imagery that we're seeing, the symbols. So we see clocks, which can represent the flowing of eternal time. There's 3 of them that you see at first glance, which can represent maybe past, present, and future. And then there's one that's turned on its face, which could represent potentially the objective flow of time. Next symbol is insects. A lot of ants on the face down clock and flies. This is seen as representing death and decay, and the ants are seen in a lot of Dali's works. I have a little dish on my counter that's a clock that has ants in it, and it's really cute. So it's like one of those things you think, oh, Dali. This weird fleshy blob in the middle is a profile, and if you tilt your head, it is modeled after Dali's own face. Got the long eyelashes, and it's clearly a nose and a mouth. And the mountains in the background are to be inferred as the mountains from Catalonia, which is his home in Spain. So it's important to understand who was painting this picture. Dali was 28, and he called his paintings hand-painted dream photographs. And the attention to detail is, I mean, it's one thing to talk about these online, but like seeing it in front of you is like, this canvas is only 9 by 13 inches. 9 by 13 inches. He was using brushes, literally like human hair size brushes. When asked about the inspiration for this piece, the melting clocks, which is so, it just kind of makes sense. Just like, it tickles my brain, it makes sense. He said it wasn't anything spectacular, it was a wheel of melting cheese in the sun that he saw when he was at a cafe one day. A cool quote from Dali is, "It is important to spread confusion, not eliminate it." Like really? Like really? So he was a surrealist through and through, just the purpose of his art was to confuse. It wasn't meant to make sense. There are tons of other notable surrealist artists out there. Rene Magritte is another fantastic example. I love his work, and I'm sure you've recognized it before. A lot of people like to put Magritte stickers on their MacBooks because the apple was a famous symbol in a lot of his works. If you're interested, feel free to further research on your own. Un Chien Andalou is on YouTube. You can watch it. It is a trip. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed my little blurb on surrealism. Modern surrealism looks a lot different, especially in the digital age. It's really, really cool to see what people can create with Photoshop, Procreate, all these different tools that we have at our disposal now. All right, you turds. Let me know what else you want to see from me. I've got a couple more fart histories planned. I would love to do a series on La Sagrada Familia, which is a famous church in Barcelona, Spain, and it is still under construction. It was began in 1882, and it's still being constructed. It incorporates so many different styles of architecture and art, and I'd love to go into detail about it. So I'll probably do that for a video coming soon. If there's any specific pieces you'd like me to talk about, I love learning, so drop them in the comments. I'll give it a quick Google search. All right, thanks guys for nerding out with me. Bye. Look at my chair. Look at my chair. It's got hands on it. Okay, bye.